Hi, I'm Caitlin. For 6 years, I paid their bills, covered their debts, fed their pride. Then a fire took everything I had. And when I stood at my mother's door, shivering, asking for a place to stay, she looked me dead in the eye and said, "This isn't a shelter." That was the moment I realized I was only valuable when I was useful. So I cut every penny, and by morning, my phone was vibrating with 69 missed calls. But it was already too late. Before we dive in, what would you have done in my place? Drop a comment below. I read every single one. I still remember that one Sunday. I must have been 12. I folded the dinner napkins into little maple leaves, watched a YouTube tutorial and everything. I even ironed them so the creases looked real when I placed them carefully around the table. Hoping for a smile, my mother just looked down and muttered, "Why do you always have to overdo everything?" Then called for Camille to bring the dessert. She praised the pie, my napkins forgotten. Funny how moments like that never really leave you. The house was gone. I parked 2 blocks away because the road was still taped off. Fire trucks had come and gone. The air reeked of wet wood, and something darker, like a memory, burned alive. Black skeletons of beams jutted out of what used to be a living room. The porch had collapsed inward, and the white paint that once made it look quaint now streaked in gray ash across scorched bricks. The house I paid for the home my family lived in, rent-free, while I lived in a studio apartment 4 miles away, just in case they ever needed me. Mom used to say, "No one called me, not when it caught fire, not when the insurance adjuster came, not when the Red Cross arrived. I called them." My mother picked up on the 3rd ring. Her voice had the tone of someone being mildly inconvenienced. "It's all gone," she said flatly. The fridge, the china set, Camille's photos. Nothing left. I waited for a pause for the words. "Thank you for keeping the insurance up to date, for wiring the premiums all those years." Instead, she added, "Camille says it was faulty wiring. We told you years ago that place needed work." I drove back to my studio, only to find the entire hallway underwater. A fire in the next building had triggered the sprinklers again. My carpets were soaked, the air thick with mildew. I stood there for 2 hours, and the smell before my knees gave in. And I sat on the floor. No one to call. No one who'd come. So I drove to Upper Saddle River. The rain made it worse. Icy, insistent, and personal. By the time I turned into the long stone driveway, my jeans clung to me like skin. I barely remember to take the keys out of the ignition. I rang the bell once. My mother opened the door, half in shadow, arms crossed. She wore one of those silk house robes that looked expensive and cold. The foyer behind her glowed with warm lighting, and Camille stood by the kitchen island in a cashmere wrap, nursing a glass of wine. She saw me, said nothing. "I just need a few nights," I whispered, "until I figure something out." My mother exhaled sharp and slow. "This isn't a shelter, Caitlin. You're not some refugee." I swallowed. "Just until I can find another apartment. Ask one of those charities you donate to, or one of the cousins you covered tuition for." She gestured vaguely behind her. "Try using all that generosity for yourself." Camille didn't move, just tilted her head slightly, as if watching a rerun she'd already seen a dozen times. I didn't beg. I turned back into the rain. The cold so deep, it started to feel like armor. I sat in my car engine, off windshield, fogging drops rolled down my cheeks, and I wasn't sure if they were rain or me. My fingers gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary. I waited 5 minutes. 10. Nobody followed. Nobody texted. I had transferred $200 to Camille 2 weeks ago for her emergency vet bill, but groceries for my parents every Thanksgiving covered Dad's cholesterol meds for the last 2 years. Without a word, I pulled out of the driveway slowly. Not because I wanted to, but because I didn't know where else to go. By the time I reached Route 17, my thoughts weren't even thoughts anymore. Just facts rearranging themselves into sharper truths. They hadn't just forgotten me, they deleted me. I was useful until I wasn't, until I needed something. Until I showed up wet, cold, and asking at a dingy motel behind a gas station. I handed over my ID and credit card. The man at the desk didn't even blink. He just slid the key toward me like this was normal. The room smelled of bleach and something lemony, like the motel wanted to seem clean but couldn't quite mask the truth. I didn't even take off my shoes, just lay on the bed and stared at the ceiling. My eyes stayed open long after midnight. Not from fear, from clarity. At 4:12 a.m., I picked up my phone, logged into each account one by one. Bank of America, Chase, PayPal, even Zelle. I began disabling cards, canceled automatic payments, paused every account tied to anyone but me. I stared at one transfer, a recurring monthly deposit to my mother's account labeled household. I deleted it. Each click felt like shedding an old skin, a bad contract I never signed but had followed for years. I've been their backbone, I said out loud. My voice sounded strange, calm, clean. Now let's see how they stand without one. And just as the sun rose, my phone lit up. 69 missed calls. The first thing I heard wasn't birds or traffic. It was the buzz of my phone vibrating so hard on the nightstand it nearly danced off the edge. I didn't need to pick it up to know it had started. I sat up slowly, bones aching from that lumpy motel mattress, and glanced at the screen. 69 missed calls. 18 from Mom, 22 from Jace, 11 from Camille, a scattering from Dad, my cousin Lizzie, and even Mrs. Felton, the neighbor who once borrowed my crock pot and never gave it back. And there it was dead center in the preview of the most recent text. Caitlin, call me right now. Don't you dare cut off the mortgage. Auto pay. Not. Are you okay? Not. Where did you sleep? Not. I'm sorry. Just panic over money. I let the phone fall back onto the thin blanket beside me. The room was stale, the kind of air that never fully aired out. But I breathed easier in it than I had at my mother's front porch. I lay back for a while, staring up at the ceiling's water-stained tiles, letting my muscles unclench. For the first time in years, the silence wasn't lonely, it was honest. Nobody had called me until the money stopped. That said it all. I finally got up and turned off all notifications. I wasn't interested in the pleading. Not until they learned how to say the truth out loud. I showered with what the motel offered, a bar of soap the size of a hotel mint, and a towel that smelled like bleach and despair. But I emerged clean, clear-headed, dressed in the cleanest jeans. I had a black tee and the navy blazer I'd stashed in my trunk out of habit. It still smelled faintly of lavender from a client meeting last fall. I looked at myself in the mirror. Tired eyes, but not broken. By 9:20, I was pulling into the parking lot of a co-working space I hadn't visited in over a year. I used to donate a few thousand each quarter to support their community room quiet space for freelance folks, young grads building apps that never launched. I'd never used it myself until today. The receptionist glanced up and blinked in surprise. Caitlin! Wow! Haven't seen you since the panel talk. Want a desk? I nodded. Yeah, that'd be great. She didn't ask why I had no laptop bag, no briefcase. She just walked me back and offered me a seat by the window. That small act felt more like family than anything I'd gotten in the last 24 hours. I pulled out my tablet connected to the Wi-Fi and got to work quietly, methodically. First, the shared family phone plan gone. Next, I logged into the trust I'd built. Yes, me with the help of a law friend years ago to protect family assets. I removed myself from management. No warning, no explanation. Then came the car lease, Mom's second car. The silver one she deserved, because she said she'd given up so much raising us. The lease I'd signed for her years ago. In a moment of guilt. Click canceled. I didn't smile, I just breathed. I was flagging a fourth auto payment, Dad's magazine subscriptions, and satellite radio, when my phone lit up with a new call. Jace! This time I picked up Caitlin, he said quickly, voice tight with urgency. You've made your point, now stop this. You know Mom didn't mean it like that, she said it. I answered while I stood there, dripping wet and homeless. A bit of silence. She panicked. She's old school. You know how she is. I didn't respond. Jace continued tone shifting like he was reading from a tired script. Camille told me about the house. We thought you were stronger than this. That stopped me. You knew? When did the fire happen, Jace? Night before last. Funny. I only found out yesterday when I showed up to Ash and Rain. He hesitated. I thought Camille told you. Look, we didn't think you'd break like this. There it was. The The sentence that made everything tilt sideways. Not "we forgot," not "we're sorry." They didn't think I'd break. As if I was just a machine that malfunctioned. I ended the call. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just sat there at the co-working desk, staring at the tree swaying outside the window. That was all I needed to hear. I wasn't forgotten. I was invisible by design. I spent the next hour at the bank. My longtime manager, Eric, greeted me with his usual calm nod. He didn't say much. He never did, but I could tell he understood. Every financial file, every document I'd once created to help my family. He helped me dismantle quietly, respectfully. When I stepped back out into the gray afternoon, something inside me felt looser, like I'd unbuckled an old tight belt that had been digging into my ribs for years. I stopped by a food truck near the edge of the co-working lot and grabbed a tuna sandwich and coffee, then headed back to the motel. The roads were damp again, clouds thick, but I drove without music, without thoughts buzzing. Back at the room, I sat down on the bed and opened the sandwich, but didn't eat. I looked around at the lamp, with the crooked shade, the carpet that hadn't seen a vacuum in weeks. The TV bolted to the wall, and then I folded the napkin that came with my sandwich. Not out of nostalgia, just instinct, into a little maple leaf. I placed it gently on my pillow, just like I did all those years ago. Only this time, I wasn't hoping anyone would notice. I wasn't part of the family. I said aloud to no one. I was the funding model. I lay back fully clothed, letting the weight of the day settle, and just before I drifted off, the phone buzzed once, a single text from Camille. No apology, just 6 words. "You should know, Mom lawyered up." Camille's text came in just past midnight. I was lying on the motel bed, with my eyes half closed, listening to the low hum of the heater. Kick on and off, on and off. The screen lit up like it had something important to say. "They're spinning it already. Watch your back and don't come by." That was it. Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "I didn't know." Not even, "Are you okay?" Just a warning, one that carried the cold weight of quiet betrayal. She wasn't siding with me. She wasn't standing up to them. She was just giving me a heads up. Like I was a coworker about to walk into a boardroom ambush. I read it 5 times, then turned the screen off. It wasn't until the next morning that I understood what she meant. After brushing my teeth with a travel brush, I picked up at the gas station. I sat down at the tiny desk in the corner of the motel room. My laptop had 1 bar of Wi-Fi. That was all I needed. I opened the browser, typed in the name of the neighborhood Facebook group. I knew Mom still used to brag about Camille's volunteer work or Jay-Z's successful real estate ventures, and there it was pinned to the top. "Prayers up for the family at Sycamore Drive. They've suffered enough losing their home, their support system. No one deserves this kind of betrayal from within." My eyes stopped on one comment underneath it. I heard the daughter who'd been funding them just cut them off. No warning, heartless. I guess some people forget blood ties when the money runs dry. I stared at that sentence for a full minute. Then I closed the laptop because it wasn't a surprise. Not really. Not after Camille's text. Not after Mom's silence that first night. They needed a villain, and I was convenient. The daughter who was too independent, too cold. The one who didn't show up for another family dinners or drop everything to babysit. I was no longer useful, so they rewrote the story. I wasn't the one who kept the lights on or paid the mortgage. When Dad retired early to follow his dream of writing a book, he never started. No, I was the saboteur, the traitor. I needed air. I threw on my coat, tucked my laptop under my arm, and stepped outside. The chill hit sharper than I expected, like the air itself didn't want me here. I walked without a clear plan, just moving, letting my boots slap against the pavement until I found myself at the public library. It was warm inside, quiet in a way that felt like sanctuary. I took a seat near the window, opened my laptop again, but didn't type. My hands just sat there. I looked up. It took a second to place her gray curls now, but the same sharp cheekbones and smart eyes. Aunt Lisa. She was Mom's cousin, technically. Never one to meddle. Never one to flatter. She just saw things. Hadn't heard from her in years. "I thought that was you," she said, holding 2 paper cups of tea. "You look tired." I let out a half laugh. "That's generous." We moved to a corner room usually reserved for tutors and book clubs. She handed me a cup. No small talk, just a long, knowing look. "Your mom used to talk about you all the time," she said finally. "Said you were distant cold even to practical." I blinked. Even when I bought her that car. Especially then. She sipped her tea. She said Caitlin doesn't hug, but she'll hand you the keys to a Lexus. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. I thought she was proud of me. "Oh?" "She was." Liza set her cup down. "Proud of your usefulness, not your heart. Never your heart. She liked saying you were the responsible one, but that was just code for the one we can lean on without guilt." Something cracked open in me. All these years I thought if I just kept giving quietly, consistently, they'd finally see me, not as a bank account, not as a fallback, but as their daughter, their sister, family. But they never wanted my love. They wanted my resources. The lie they told everyone else that I was distant, uncaring, too business-minded. But the lie they loved, the one that made everything easier for them, was this: that I owed them affection in the form of money, that if I didn't give, I didn't love, and that any boundary was cruelty. I thanked Aunt Liza for the tea and stepped out into the late afternoon light. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to text Camille back either. Instead, I walked a few blocks later. I found myself outside Camille's gated neighborhood. I didn't even know what I was doing there until I saw the stone pillars and the call box blinking beside the gate. I walked closer. A security guard spotted me. He leaned toward the intercom. "You here for Camille?" I stood there for 3 seconds. "No," I said, and I turned around because I wasn't here to beg. I just needed to see it to prove to myself that I wasn't imagining it, that I wasn't welcome anymore if I ever had been. I was never going to be the sister who dropped by unannounced or got waved through the gate. The wind picked up as I headed back toward town. My hands were cold, but I didn't shove them in my pockets. I wanted to feel it. By the time I got to the co-working space, dusk was settling in. The front desk girl didn't ask for ID, just smiled and buzzed me in. Maybe she remembered me. Maybe she just saw the look on my face and knew not to question it. I sat down at a desk by the window, opened a fresh document title, "What I Paid For," and I started typing. Not to rage, not to get even, just to record it line by line. What I paid for, what I was promised, what was taken. Every mortgage, every tuition check, every quiet forgiveness. Every time I swallowed the urge to say, "This isn't fair," I wrote until my fingers ached. Then I formatted the email back to every cousin who ever asked for a loan to the church committee. Mom used to parade me in front of, to the investment club Dad introduced me to as our golden goose, and finally to Camille. At the very bottom of the email, I typed a single line: "You cannot disown someone you never truly welcomed." My hand hovered over the mouse, but I hadn't hit send yet because someone knocked on my motel door. The knock wasn't timid. It came with the weight of years. I'd been told to keep quiet and give more. I set my laptop aside and stepped toward the door, peered through the peephole. There she was, my mother, standing under the yellow flicker of the hallway light, rain plastering her scarf to her neck. Her coat clinging to her like armor. She wasn't shivering. She wasn't sorry. She was furious. I cracked the door slowly, still unsure if I'd hallucinated the knock. The image. Her eyes narrowed. "We need to talk now." I opened the door wide enough for her to enter. She brushed past me without waiting for an invitation, her heels clicking on the thin carpet like a clock counting down to something I wasn't ready for. Once inside, she turned to face me, arms crossed, still clutching her purse like it contained the last ounce of control she had. "You've created a disaster," she said, not even pretending to soften the blow. "We've had to delay Camille's mortgage. Your father can't show his face at church without people whispering, 'He's humiliated.'" I stood still, hands at my sides, letting her words echo and fall. I didn't speak. She stepped closer. "Do you even understand what you've done?" And then she said it, the part that slid into my chest and settled like ice. "This isn't about the money, it's about how you've made us look. Not about love, not about hurt, about optics." I blinked. "That's what matters to you?" I asked, voice quiet. She rolled her eyes. "People talk. They assume things." I nodded slowly, let them. She flinched like I'd slapped her. I took a breath. The silence between us thickened, old and familiar. It wasn't anger. I felt. It was clarity. For years, I said I gave you whatever you needed. Not because you asked kindly, but because I believed deep down you'd eventually see me. Not for what I gave, but for who I was. She said nothing. I've been funding appearances, not people. That stops now. She let out a short laugh, sharp and bitter. So what now? You want us to crawl to beg you? No, I said. I want you to manage. The way I always had to. Alone. Quietly, without thanks. Her face twisted. You think you're better than us? I looked her in the eye. No, I think I'm just no longer pretending I'm less. That hit. She picked up her purse like a judge closing court. You've changed. No, I said. I just finally stopped apologizing for not being Camille. Her hand hesitated on the doorknob as if she wanted to say more. Maybe even something real. But old habits die hard. Instead, she gave me one last look that I couldn't decipher. Rage, maybe. Or regret. Buried too deep to reach. And left. The door clicked shut behind her. I stood there for a moment, letting the stillness return. I wasn't surprised, not really, but something in me had shifted, solidified. After rinsing my face in the sink, I grabbed my coat and stepped outside. The rain had thinned to a mist, soft and indifferent. Across the street, a neon diner sign buzzed dimly. I walked over. Inside, the warmth was instant. Vinyl booths, old jazz, murmuring from a speaker, and a waitress who didn't ask questions. Just brought me coffee and a plate of pancakes I hadn't ordered, but ate anyway. I sat in silence, surrounded by strangers who didn't know who I used to be, or who I had just become. And that anonymity felt kind. When the check came, the waitress smiled and slid it across the table. It's been taken care of, she said, almost as an afterthought. A man paid for it before you walked in. Left a note. She placed the folded napkin down. I opened it slowly, fingers unsure. You were never invisible, that's all it said. I looked up startled, but the booth near the window was empty. Whoever it was, he was gone. Still holding the note, I pressed it into my coat pocket, like it meant more than anything I'd heard in the last 20 years. Back in my motel room, the air felt different. Not lighter, but mine. I opened my laptop, clicked through my accounts. There it was, an attempted withdrawal from the old joint account I once stupidly shared with my mother. Denied. I reset every password, locked everything down tight. Then I returned to the email I'd written the night before. The one blind copied to every relative, pastor, family friend, investment partner. The people who always smiled at me, but only saw what I could give. I read it through one last time, and then I hit send. By morning, the family group chat exploded. And this time I didn't look away. By morning, the family group chat lit up like someone had thrown gasoline onto old dry grudges. First, Camille. Her name popped up in bold. Camille, what the hell is wrong with you? Then Mom just as sharp. Mom, call me back immediately. Dad just seen no reply. Of course. I sat on the edge of the motel bed, scrolling through their outrage with the same detachment I'd have reading someone else's weather report. Cold front coming through. Sure. Been living in it. Then the screen blinked. Camille was calling. I let it ring once, twice, picked up. What do you want? I asked flatly. Her voice cracked right out of the gate. You ruined everything, she said, trembling somewhere between fury and panic. The bank's refusing to extend the credit line. Mom hasn't stopped crying since last night. Dad had to cancel the meeting with the realtor. I didn't respond. Just let her fill the space with the mess they'd made. You made us depend on you, she continued, and then you just walked away like none of it mattered. That was the sentence that did it. I leaned back, phone cradled between cheek and shoulder. No, I said, quiet but firm. You chose to depend on me. I never asked for that. You built your plans around my silence, not my consent. She fell quiet for a second, but I heard her breathing shift, frustration becoming something deeper then, like a dam breaking. The words spilled out. I didn't have a choice, Caitlin. You had the credit. I needed the mortgage. You said you'd help. And just like that, I was back there. It was 2 years ago. I'd flown in for a short visit. Camille had picked me up from the airport, bubbly, and rehearsed. There'd been something in her voice, too upbeat, too polished. We're meeting with a real estate agent, she'd said casually, like she was inviting me to lunch. I remember parking outside a townhouse just outside Atlanta, brick clean lined with a backyard so pristine it looked printed. Camille had turned to me, eyes wide with some mix of hope and calculation. Look, she'd said, I can cover the payments. I need a cosigner just to help me qualify. I hesitated. Something about it didn't sit right. Then Mom chimed in over speakerphone as if she'd been rehearsing her line all morning. Don't be selfish, she said. She's your sister. That sentence had always worked on me until it didn't. So I signed. I didn't live there, I didn't visit, but I paid the difference. Whenever Camille's checks ran tight, and every time I asked what happened to her freelance jobs or why Dad wasn't helping, I got the same vague answer. It's complicated. No, it was simple. I'd been funding pride disguised as crisis. Now, back in that motel room with her voice still in my ear, I saw it all, for what it really was. You want me to fix it? I asked. There was a long pause. She's having a breakdown, Camille said. Quieter now. Mom's doctor said her blood pressure. I cut her off. She's just now breaking down after 6 years of me covering bills sleeping in my car. Some nights and being told I was the cold one. I didn't get a doctor. I didn't get breakdown privileges. I just got ignored. The line went silent. Then click. She hung up. I let the phone fall onto the bed screen, facing up like it still had something more to say. But all I could hear was the hum of the cheap motel fridge kicking on and off like it couldn't decide how much to try. I was halfway through brushing my teeth when the motel phone rang. Not my cell, the old beige landline next to the bed. I picked it up. Miss Holt. Front desk. There's a delivery for you. A delivery envelope. Courier dropped it off 5 minutes ago. I blinked at my reflection. My towel was still draped around my shoulders. I'd been planning to shower, maybe nap, and not face anyone for the rest of the morning. But now I threw on jeans and a hoodie, twisted my hair into a low bun, and headed downstairs. The envelope was thick. No name on the outside, just my room number written in a slanted cursive, like someone in a rush. The clerk didn't ask questions. I didn't offer answers. Back in my room, I peeled it open slowly inside folded papers, crisp old insurance header in the corner. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Then I saw the date. Right after the fire, my name had been typed on the beneficiary line, then crossed out a newer name scribbled in Camille's. There wasn't even an attempt to hide it, just ink over ink correction, fluid, sloppy. I stared at it for a long time, my fingers tracing the outline of where my name used to be. So that was it. I hadn't been abandoned after the fire. I'd been erased long before the flames ever touched the walls. I sat back on the motel bed. The envelope opened beside me, like a wound that had finally stopped bleeding, but left an ache that wouldn't go away. The documents were old, the kind you could smell, the kind that yellow at the edges, but it was the handwriting that held me still. Right there in slanted blue ink, my name had been listed as the original beneficiary. Then just below it, crossed out a single line, almost casual beneath it. My father's signature, not typed, not notarized, just him and a pen, like he was scratching out a mistake on a grocery list. The new beneficiary, Camille. I didn't shake with anger. It wasn't rage anymore. It was something quieter, more final, like the sound a door makes when it clicks shut behind you. And you know there's no key on your side. 2 years ago, I remembered there'd been this red binder Mom handed me after a plumbing issue almost flooded their kitchen. She'd been unusually cheerful that day, just in case anything happens. She said, handing it to me like it was a casserole. I'd offered to digitize it, make sure it was all backed up, but she smiled and waved her hand. No need, we've got it sorted. Back then, I believed her, thought maybe, just maybe I was being trusted, included. Turns out they'd already made other plans that didn't include me. I needed answers, not more feelings, not more questions. I'd cry into my pillow about I needed facts. By noon, I was pulling into a narrow parking spot near the county records office downtown. The building itself was unimpressive, peeling beige paint, humming fluorescent lights, and a slow-turning ceiling fan that didn't seem to move any air. I approached the clerk behind the glass window. Her nameplate read Deborah, and she looked like she'd seen her share of people trying to pull fast ones. Hi, I said, trying to sound calm. I'm here to request a copy of an insurance claim filed about 5 weeks ago. It was for a residential fire on Linton Avenue. I believe I'm on the policy." Deborah raised an eyebrow. "Fire claims are sensitive. Only listed beneficiaries or authorized agents can access those." I slid the document from the envelope across the counter. My name was on the original paperwork. "This came in the mail this morning." She took it, adjusted her glasses, and frowned. After a moment, she disappeared into the back. 5 minutes ticked by, then 10. When she returned, she had a stapled set of pages in her hand and a crease between her brows. There was an amendment filed 3 weeks before the fire beneficiary was updated to a Camille Halt. She paused. "You're not listed anywhere now." My voice came out even. That's all I needed to know. "Thank you." I walked back to my car, closed the door gently, and sat there for a few minutes without moving. My palms rested on the steering wheel. It was the silence inside the car that hit me hardest. Not just absence of sound, but the absence of illusion of hope. Halfway back to the motel, my phone buzzed. "Camille." Her name lit up the screen like a warning flare. I didn't answer, but the message popped through anyway. "Camille, you're being cruel. We're family. You're overreacting." Overreacting, I should have laughed, but I didn't. I just kept driving, eyes forward, one hand tightening on the wheel at the next intersection. I made an unexpected turn. The lot where the house used to stand hadn't changed much since the fire. The boards were still up, charred beams stacked in uneven piles. The smell was long gone, but the weight remained like grief that had dried but never really faded. I parked across the street and walked slowly toward the blackened frame. No one stopped me. No neighbors looked out from their windows, just me. The wind and what used to be home carefully. I stepped over a collapsed beam, picking my way through the ruins. Glass crunched under my shoes. The porch had disintegrated, but the remnants of the living room were still recognizable. Burnt sofa, springs a twisted floor lamp, and part of the wall where our family photos used to hang. Something glinted near the rubble. I leaned down a picture frame scorched along the edges. Its glass cracked diagonally. Inside was a photo from years ago. Just me and my mother standing in front of the same house. I must have been 12 or 13, holding a watering can. Mom with her arm around me. The image had browned around the sides. Heat mottled, but our faces were still visible, and it hit me not just the betrayal of paperwork and signatures and crossed out names, but the realization that even this photo was left behind to burn. I stood there a moment longer, staring at what was once so precious. Then I picked it up, brushed off the soot with my sleeve, and held it tightly. I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I just turned away and left the ashes behind for good. This time, the gravel crunched beneath my tires as I pulled into the motel parking lot. The evening sun already softening into a dusky gold. I sat there in the car a moment longer, staring out at nothing, fingers resting on the steering wheel. I wasn't thinking about the ashes anymore. Not about the picture, or Camilo's message, or even the house. Something had settled in me. A stillness that didn't feel empty, just done. Back inside my room, I dropped the keys on the nightstand and pulled my old laptop from the duffel bag under the bed. It creaked when I opened it, the hinge catching the same way it had for years. The screen flickered on, bringing up the familiar folder I'd used for 6 years. Family expenses. I clicked the spreadsheet open. Every line was there. Every check I'd ever written. Every online transfer. Cell phone bills. When Camille lost her job. Rent. When Mom said her pension check came late. Grocery school fees for Camille's son when they insisted public school wasn't an option. Even their gas cards all logged with dates, amounts, brief notes. A part of me had kept it out of duty. Another part, maybe out of desperation, to prove I was worth something. 143, 770s, 58. I said the number out loud. It didn't echo, but it landed heavy in the room. Then I opened my banking app. By the time the sun was fully up, I was parked downtown in front of the old brick building with iron-framed windows. The main branch of my family's credit union, the same place my parents had set up our first joint account when I was 19, and still believed their promises meant something inside. The chill of the air conditioning hit my arms. A bank manager in his mid-50s greeted me behind the glass partition. I'd like to freeze and close all accounts associated with these routing and linked numbers, I said, sliding the paperwork across the desk. He looked up, blinking. These are joint accounts with your mother, sister. Yes, I replied, calm as glass. And here's the documentation. You'll see patterns of unauthorized withdrawals, inconsistent signatures, and 3 wire transfers in my name without my consent. His brow furrowed as he flipped through the pages. He didn't ask if I was sure. 10 minutes later, he returned. It's done. The accounts are frozen. All outgoing transactions are halted. Credit lines locked. Any cards tied to them will be declined. I gave a small nod. Thank you. On the way out, I walked past a young couple arguing in the ATM line. I didn't stop. I didn't feel guilty. For once, I didn't feel anything but focused. Back in the car, I sat with the laptop open on the passenger seat, fingers hovering over the touchpad. I scrolled down to a highlighted line. April 22nd, wired to Camille, 4,000. Tyrone lost job. I remembered that night like it had just happened. Camille sobbing over the phone, voice cracking as she said they were about to lose their house. I hadn't questioned it. I'd opened my account and sent the money before dinner. I'd eaten cereal for 3 days after I couldn't pay rent on time. Now, staring at that same line, I didn't feel shame. I moved the cursor over it and clicked. Delete row gone. My phone buzzed. Caitlin, it's Armand. Came the voice of my attorney when I answered. He never wasted time with pleasantries. Just a heads up. Camille and her husband filed a countersuit. I rubbed my temple. Let me guess. Wrong. Full abandonment. Bingo. It's a flimsy filing. Emotional distress. Financial disruption. You know all the stuff they never had a problem putting on your shoulders. I let out a quiet laugh. Let them explain to a judge how the abandoned daughter paid off their back taxes and helped fund their kitchen remodel. He chuckled too. Exactly. I'm not worried, but I thought you should know. Thanks. Keep me posted. I ended the call, tossed the phone on the passenger seat, and exhaled slowly. By late afternoon, the sky had dimmed and the wind was picking up again. I'd stopped by a cafe for tea and checked into a new motel. Cleaner. Quieter while the kettle hissed. I heard the phone vibrate once, twice. Then it wouldn't stop. I glanced at the screen. 14 missed calls, then 23, then 39. It was like a dam had burst. Camille, Tyrone, Mom, even Uncle Don voicemails poured in. I let them go to inbox. For a moment, I stared at the screen before hitting play. Caitlin, what are you doing? I just tried to get groceries and the car didn't work. Call me back. Another. Your mother's account is frozen. What is happening? Are you punishing us? Then one from Camille, her voice sharper than before. You can't do this. You owe us, after everything we've done for you. I stared at the wall expressionless. Then I turned the phone off. I didn't owe them anything, not anymore. But I did. A one person myself. I stepped away from the ringing phone and let the silence settle. The motel room had gone dim, the sun fading behind stained blinds. My palms were still warm from holding the last voicemail. But inside I felt cold, steady, not angry, just done. That night I barely slept, not because I was restless, but because my mind was sorting through years of mess, like an old attic being cleared out box by box. Around 6:30, I pushed the covers off, brewed the motel's burnt coffee, and opened my laptop again. I knew what I needed to see. The fire report had finally gone public. I searched the department's database, typed the address I knew by heart, and pulled up the document. My pulse didn't even spike. It wasn't faulty wiring like Camille told everyone. Not some mysterious freak accident like my mother hinted over the years. It was a space heater left running in Camille's old room. They never told me that, not once. They let me believe I had left behind something broken, that I was careless, that if I had just been around more, it wouldn't have happened. But it had nothing to do with me, it was their neglect, and they buried the truth the same way they tried to bury me. I let the laptop rest against my legs and stared out the window. The air outside felt cooler than usual, cleaner, like it had just rained. Even though it hadn't. For a long moment, my mind wandered back to the first day I moved into that house 10 years ago, almost to the week. I had just graduated from community college. No party, no cake, just a car full of plastic tubs and a grateful heart. I remember painting the walls in that little side room myself, pale green. I chose the color because it reminded me of fresh leaves, new beginnings. I set up a desk next to the window right beside the heater, the same one they promised to replace. "We'll get to it next month," Mom had said, tying her hair back with a rubber band as she passed by the doorway. She never looked up from her phone. They never fixed it. Winter came. I used extra blankets. Summer came. I barely used the room because it got stuffy. The heater stayed. And now that same heater was the origin of the fire. And they never even mentioned it. They just scrubbed me out like a mistake. I closed the laptop and got dressed slowly. Nothing fancy, just jeans and a clean shirt, but I tucked my spreadsheet printout into my bag. I didn't know yet where I was going, but something in me needed to walk to breathe, to understand all the ways I'd been erased, and to choose intention not to disappear. I ended up at the public library. A short walk, the air brisk, but kind inside. It was quiet, safe. "Hi," I said to the archivist at the front desk. "I'm looking for any local news stories from 7 months ago. There was a house fire on Maple Drive." She nodded and disappeared behind a small wall of shelves. A few minutes later, she slid a folder onto the table where I waited, and there it was. "Local family displaced eldest daughter to the rescue." The headline slapped me harder than I expected. The article was glowing. Camille had set up a GoFundMe. She raised $22,000 in 3 days, according to the write-up. There were photos of her, of my parents, even of the charred remains of the front porch. They smiled in front of it, arms around each other like survivors of a war. But I wasn't mentioned, not once, not even a footnote. I read it twice just to be sure. It was like someone had taken a red pen and crossed me out of the narrative altogether. Not dead, not missing, just deleted. I whispered to myself, barely louder than a breath. I didn't just walk away, they erased me. I don't know how long I sat there, but when I stood, my back ached, and the weight in my chest had settled into something solid. Instead of returning to the motel, I drove to the cemetery. The grass was overgrown in places, but I found the plot easily. My maternal grandmother Delima, she was the only one who had ever made me feel like I wasn't a burden. When I was 12 and Camille got the flu, it was Grandma who stayed up with me all night, helping with my science fair volcano. She told me my mind was worth protecting, and that people would try to convince me otherwise. I knelt beside her stone and sat for a long while. "I know you'd say not to fight fire with fire," I murmured. "But you'd also say, don't let them burn your name for warmth, baby." I pulled out a photo, one I'd kept hidden for years. It was me and Grandma at the zoo. She had cotton candy on her cheek, and I was laughing. No front teeth. I sealed it in a clear plastic slip and taped it to the back of her marker. A small act, but it felt like closing a door without slamming it. As the afternoon faded, I drove to a small building tucked off the main road. Beige siding, a red door, second floor. No elevator, but it was mine. I unlocked the apartment. The space was humble, bare white walls, a chipped counter in the kitchen, but it smelled clean like possibility. I placed my bag down and reached inside. Out came the old spreadsheet. Every dollar I'd spent on that family, every lie I believed was love. I laid it on the empty dining table and scribbled a new title on top, Proof of Love. And I knew standing there in that quiet room with nothing but a single bag and my own name on the lease, that love without respect wasn't love at all. It was just debt in disguise. But love without respect is just debt in disguise. I was folding the last of my clean towels, still warm from the dryer, when I heard it. 3 firm knocks. No doorbell, just a pause. Then 2 more. I glanced through the people. Camille. No heavy eyeliner, no gold hoops. Her hair was tied back in a limp ponytail. She looked older than she had a week ago, tight around the mouth, like she'd been biting her words too long. I cracked the door, didn't move back, just looked her in the eye. She didn't blink. "We need to talk," she said. I didn't say yes. I just grabbed my keys and jacket, pulled the door shut behind me. We walked in silence to a small cafe around the corner. Not the kind with waitstaff, just a counter and a few booths. I nodded at the barista and slid into a booth near the window. Camille sat across from me, hands clasped together so tightly, her knuckles were pale. "Mom's losing it," she said, eyes fixed on a chipped sugar jar. "She's convinced you're out to destroy her." Dad barely talks. He just stares at the garage door like it'll open and you'll walk in. I stirred my coffee slowly, letting the silence breathe. Camille's voice cracked. "They think you're punishing them, but the truth is you were the glue. You were the only one keeping anything upright." She let out a bitter laugh. "And we kicked you out like you were a burden." I met her eyes. "I know." She blinked rapidly, looked away. "Do you want us to beg?" "Fine." She pressed her palms to the table like she was steadying herself. "I'm begging. Please, just help one more time." I set my coffee down. The clink was sharper than I expected. "No." Camille froze. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't flinch because it was never one more time. "Camille." It was always the next time, and the one after that. "You don't see me. You just see what I can give." For a moment, she looked like she might argue, but no words came. Just a shallow breath and the wet sheen of pride slipping out of her eyes. We paid separately. I walked ahead as we left. No goodbye. 3 nights earlier, I'd written a letter I never intended to send. I was sitting on the floor of my new apartment, wrapped in a blanket, with a metal mixing bowl and a box of matches beside me. The letter was simple. No accusations, no demands. I loved you enough to carry everyone I wrote. Now I love myself enough to let go. I folded it once, then again lit a match. Watched the flame curl the paper until the words crumbled to ash. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like sweeping the last soot from the windowsill. Back in the cafe, a young woman in a brown apron brought over my receipt. She looked barely 25 freckles across her cheeks. "You have a calm way of speaking," she said almost shyly. "I wish I had that strength." I smiled just a little. I didn't have it. I built it. She nodded like she understood, then walked off to clear a nearby table. I left a generous tip and stepped outside. The light had softened to late afternoon gold filtering through the trees like everything had taken a breath. My phone buzzed a voicemail from Mom. I didn't hesitate. Deleted. No guilt. The walk back to my apartment was quiet. Just the hum of passing cars and the rustle of leaves in the breeze. On my kitchen counter, a white envelope waited. It was from the non-profit I'd applied to last month, back when I still wasn't sure I had anything left to give. "Dear Caitlin, we're thrilled to welcome you as our newest financial literacy mentor. Your experience and insight will help women regain control of their futures." I stood still for a long moment, hands resting on the edge of the counter. The apartment was modest, second-hand furniture, soft yellow light from the window. One potted plant I hadn't managed to kill, but it was mine. Mine, I tucked the letter into a folder labeled "Start Here." Then walked to the center of the room. There were no framed degrees, no family photos, just a quiet hum of peace. For the first time in years, I wasn't bracing for the next crisis. I wasn't holding my breath, waiting for another knock. If it came, I'd answer, but I wouldn't hand over my peace again. Not for guilt, not for history, not for blood. I didn't walk away bitter, I walked away, whole. Story 2. Hi, I'm Alora. They said I was the kind one, the dependable one. So when the whole family flew to Hawaii, they left me behind to feed a man they claimed couldn't speak, couldn't move. But the second that door closed, he stood up, smiled, and said, "Now we begin." Turns out, I wasn't the caregiver. I was the cover story. The maid in their castle. The girl with a name they were quietly erasing. And now I wonder, was I ever family or just the help with a heartbeat? Before we begin, drop a comment. Where are you listening from? And tell me, has your own family ever made you feel envisaged? I stood on the driveway, gripping the edge of Sybil's overstuffed luggage with both hands. The wheels of her suitcase squeaked against the gravel as I hoisted it into the back of her SUV. She didn't offer to help. None of them ever did. "You'll manage," dear Cressida said, patting my cheek like I was a 10-year-old, not a 38-year-old woman. "No one's better at serving than you." I gave her a tight smile. My jaw clenched, but I said nothing. That was my specialty, wasn't it? Saying nothing, doing everything. They piled into the car. Cressida, Sybil, her husband, Royce, their son, Mason, and within minutes they were gone. Off to Honolulu, sun and sand. I stood in the silence they left behind, my arms suddenly cold. Just me and him now. Inside the house smelled like antiseptic and dust. A half-used container of oatmeal sat on the kitchen counter next to a tray with a laminated schedule written in Sybil's flowery handwriting. 8 meds, 12 a soup, 430 change linens. Do not forget the sponge bath. I stared at it for a moment, then walked to the sink, ran the water, and rinsed my hands like I had some kind of purpose. The kitchen window gave a view of the backyard, once full of roses, now just brittle stalks. I'd trimmed them for years. No one ever noticed. My eyes fell on the old family portrait on the wall. Everyone else beaming me in the corner, holding Mason when he was a baby, because Sybil was too tired that day. I remember standing there, arms aching, smile frozen, wondering how I ended up being everyone's placeholder. They never invited me on these trips. Birthdays, graduations, even Crusaders' retirement party. I was too valuable at home to spare. And when I said nothing, they took it as consent. But today, something already felt off. I carried the tray into Jasper's room. The door creaked louder than I remembered. The curtains were drawn, casting everything in dull blue light. Medical equipment buzzed faintly, oxygen tank humming, heart rate monitor beeping at a steady pace. It was all theater. Lunch! I called out softly, nudging the door further with my foot. It's chicken and rice. No answer, no movement. I stepped closer, carefully placing the tray on the bedside table. His head was turned toward the window body, rigid under a patchy wool blanket. I reached for the spoon just as a low, raspy chuckle echoed behind me. It didn't come from the hallway. I turned, pulse pounding. Jasper, who hadn't moved in nearly a year, was sitting upright. His lips curled into a sardonic smile. His voice was gravel, but steady. "Well?" he said, tilting his head. "Every castle needs a maid." The spoon clattered to the floor. My knees buckled and I caught myself on the edge of the dresser. He stood up smoothly. No struggle, no cane. He stretched his arms like a man waking from a nap, not one recovering from a massive stroke. My mouth went dry. "You what? Not a word of this outside this room," he said calmly, crossing to the door and locking it behind him with a soft click. I backed up instinctively. This is a joke, right?" Sybil said. "Oh, Sybil," he interrupted with a smirk. "Sybil says whatever Cressida tells her to say, and Cressida, she's been preparing for my funeral since the day I signed the first power of attorney document." She slipped under my nose. I stared at him. "You've been pretending." He nodded slowly for almost a year. The room started to spin. I reached for the wall to steady myself. "Why would you?" Because he said, his voice dropping. I needed to know how far they'd go, and I needed someone who could see through them. He walked to the closet, his limp now completely gone, and opened a hidden compartment behind a false wall panel. My breath caught a small safe. "They think you're nobody, Allura," he said without turning around. "That's why you're perfect." "I don't understand," I whispered. "Why me?" He looked over his shoulder, her eyes sharper than I'd ever seen. "Because you're the one." They undressed, omitted. "They left you behind, thinking you'd clean, feed, bathe, and quietly disappear." I shook my head. "They're family." "No," he said. "They're predators, and you've been their sheep." He turned to me, then expression softening for just a second. "I know this is a lot, but if you don't want to be buried alive with the lies they built, you're going to have to dig." He leaned in closer, his voice nearly a whisper. "Everything you feared they planned worse." I didn't ask what that meant. I didn't have to. Jasper knelt, turned the combination on the safe with fingers that moved like they remembered every number by heart. "They forgot something," he muttered with a soft click. The door swung open. He looked at me, eyes dark, intense. "It's time you saw the first file." He didn't look at me as the safe clicked open, just calmly pulled out a thick brown folder with no label, no writing. He handed it to me like it weighed nothing. But when I held it, it felt heavy, like it knew I didn't move at first. My fingers hovered over the corner, hesitant. Then I flipped the flap, and saw the first document. A scanned copy of a deed-familiar letterhead property lines our address. But it wasn't the house that took my breath. It was the names. My name was there, and then scratched out literally a printed line drawn through it. And in its place, Monroe Griffin and Sybil Griffin trustees. I stared this. This is my name. Why is it crossed out? Jasper leaned back, folding his arms. They filed that 6 months ago. Monroe signed you off without your knowledge. The house is no longer in your name. I blinked. My lungs forgot how to breathe. 6 months ago. That explained the refinancing call I'd made in April. The bank rep told me the system couldn't verify my ownership. I thought it was a clerical error. I brushed it off like always. Jasper kept speaking, but I could barely hear him. My vision blurred, tunneled to that one redacted line. Allura Griffin. My name like I'd been erased. He nudged the folder. There's more. The second document was an account transfer. My mom's old life insurance payout, over $110,000. I hadn't touched it since her funeral. Kept it in savings for emergencies. Or maybe a fresh start someday. Gone. The trail of paperwork was meticulous. Clean-looking spreadsheets, transfer notices, even email printouts. Each one told the same story. My inheritance had been drained, funneled through a joint account Monroe opened right after our wedding. An account I never knew existed. From there, into a trust labeled Griffin Family Holdings. The beneficiaries. Cressida. Sybil Mason. Not me. Jesus, I muttered. How the hell Jasper didn't flinch? They used your loyalty as a screen. You never asked questions. They counted on that. My hands trembled. I thought Monroe was. He told me we were saving, that he was consolidating accounts to plan for our future. His future may be, Jasper said low, but it never included you. I sat down on the edge of the ottoman, paper still in hand. My body moved like it belonged to someone else. I felt split in two, one half frozen in disbelief, the other already burning in anger. He stood up and walked to the far corner of the room, unlocking another small cabinet I hadn't noticed before. From it, he pulled a slim older model laptop and set it down in front of me. Watch this, he said. He clicked through a few folders, then opened a video file. It was grainy handheld footage. A wedding reception, fancy ballroom laughter, clinking glasses, Monroe in a dark suit, standing by a microphone. To our family, he said, raising a glass, and to the future beneficiaries, Sybil and Cressida. The room cheered. My jaw tightened. That was Royce and Sybil's wedding 2 years ago. I wasn't there. They told me I'd come down with a fever, that I'd been too weak to travel. Monroe gave me medication, something to help me sleep through the symptoms. A memory hit like a fist. The glass of orange juice on my nightstand. That bitter aftertaste. Me drifting off mid-sentence. I hadn't been sick. I'd been sedated. My throat closed up. Jasper quietly slid over a small amber bottle. My name was on the label. Elora. Calm drops. I stared at it. Hands clenching. They use this to keep you out of sight, he said whenever there was something important to sign or something they didn't want you to remember. I looked at him. This can't be legal. No, but it's hard to prove when your power of attorney isn't in your name anymore. He reached into the folder again and pulled out another document. This one wasn't scanned. It was the original. A notarized legal transfer, my signature on it, or something close enough to pass, filed 2 days after last year's Christmas dinner. The same night, I thought I'd passed out from too much wine. I remember waking up on the couch, humiliated, everyone laughing, telling me I couldn't handle a little eggnog. I believed them. You didn't sign this, Jasper said. No, I said, rage rising in my chest. But I believed I might have. That's what they'd done. Bit by bit, moment by moment. They didn't just steal from me. They made me doubt my own mind. I looked down at my hands. The same hands that changed diapers, poured wine, folded napkins, ran errands. Always helping. Always just staying out of the way. They made me believe I was unstable, I whispered. Jasper gave a small nod. They needed you out of the way, but now you know. I didn't reply. My eyes drifted back to the folder. One more paper sat tucked in the back, smaller than the others, a simple receipt. It was for a storage unit under my name in town. Paid for in cash. Last accessed 5 months ago. I stood up, my voice shaking but clear. Take me there now. Jasper didn't ask twice. He just picked up the car keys from the kitchen counter and headed out to the truck. I followed the folder still pressed to my chest like armor. I didn't speak during the drive. Couldn't. My brain was crawling with jagged thoughts, half-formed memories, faces I trusted, moments I now realized were scripted. We passed downtown Eugene, slowly. The trees along the sidewalks were already turning rusty red and ochre, spilling across the branches like paint from a tipped bucket. A crispness had crept into the air, that edge of fall where the light looks thinner even at midday. I remember when Monroe gave me that box. Just something for safekeeping, he'd said. No explanation. I'd tucked it in the back of our shared closet under winter coats and dusty linens. I never thought to ask where it ended up. And now, here we were, turning into a chain of identical orange doors with numbers stenciled in white. Unit 114. Jasper parked. You sure? I nodded. He unlocked the metal door and rolled it up. Dust exploded outward in a dull cloud. Sunlight spilled inside and hit concrete. Empty shelves. A few old banker's boxes, but near the back, slightly off-center, sat one blue plastic tote. Jasper gestured for me to take the lead. I walked slowly, heels echoing on the floor, the silence unnerving. I crouched beside the tote. No lock, just a cracked lid and years of grime. When I opened it, I expected, I don't know, bills, trash, maybe nothing but not this. Photographs. Stacks of them bundled with brittle rubber bands curled at the edges, all of them of me. At family events I didn't remember attending. There I was at Mason's graduation party, standing next to the banner, smiling tightly. I had no recollection of that day. A group shot from Cassidy's engagement dinner. Everyone in pastel dresses. Champagne. I was at the end of the table, face turned halfway to the camera, but my face had been scratched out violently with something sharp. I held the photo up. What the hell? Below the photos was a small gray folder marked in faded pen H. Contingency records for emergency eyes only. I flipped it open on top. A letter handwritten in narrow cursive. If you're reading this, it began. Then I finally left. It was signed Hattie Samuels. The name rang a faint bell. Monroe mentioned her once, a nurse who helped with Jasper's recovery. I'd only seen her in passing. She was always between shifts out running errands. Just missed you. Tucked into the envelope was a small voice recorder. Old heavy. I looked at Jasper. He just nodded. Play it. I hit the button. A woman's voice, soft and southern, crackled through. Hi, Allura. If this finds you, I hope you're safe. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I was hired by Monroe and Sybil not to care for Jasper, but to keep up appearances. Your father-in-law didn't need me. He was perfectly fine. Always was. I closed my eyes. The recorder kept going. My job was to make sure you never suspected anything. When you visited, I was to be nearby acting concerned, carrying trays, whispering about meds. If you noticed anything strange. I was told to say he had episodes, but there were no episodes. My mouth went dry. I pressed play again, just to make sure I hadn't misheard. Monroe and Sybil said it was about protecting the family name. Said you were too emotional, too unpredictable, that it was best to limit what you saw, what you knew. I walked to the corner of the unit. Everything I had accepted as truth. Every skipped invitation, every vague excuse, you're better off. Staying home was part of a performance, and I'd played my part silently perfectly. Back at the tote, Jasper lifted out a small binder. Inside were calendar pages, each square marked with notes. Only some dates had that phrase, others didn't. They brought you in, Jasper said, flipping through, only when they needed to reinforce the illusion. You weren't part of the family's rhythm. You were the wallpaper. I clenched my fists. They rehearsed. The castle needs a maid line. Jasper didn't deny it. It was never a slip. It was a signal, a script. I picked up a photo from the tote. Sybil standing in my kitchen, holding my favorite mug. The one Monroe got me on our first trip to Astoria. It had a chipped rim and a faded blue lighthouse. Sybil was holding it like it belonged to her. I didn't cry. Not this time. I stared at her frozen smile in the photo, then dropped it back into the box. "I'm done being the quiet one," I said, voice flat but steady. Jasper waited, said nothing. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out my phone. My hand didn't shake this time. I need to talk to my father-in-law alone. I hung up with Jasper and took a long breath at the doorstep. The air inside the house was unnervingly still. Not heavy, just deliberate, like everything in it had already chosen a side. I walked down the hallway to the back study, past portraits of the family hung in prideful symmetry, my face of course missing from all of them. Horace was already seated when I entered. No wheelchair, no robe, no shaking hands, just slippers, beige corduroys, and a cup of tea steaming on the desk. "You've been busy," he said, not looking up. His voice was level, nearly bored. I stepped forward and placed the voice recorder on his desk. "Hit play." Hattie's words filled the room calm but damning. Horace didn't flinch when it stopped. He gave a small nod. She lasted longer than I expected. I told Monroe she had a weak conscience. I didn't say a word. I needed him to fill the space. Horace leaned back slightly. "What do you want from me, Laura?" An apology, a revelation, or just confirmation that what you've suspected all these years is in fact exactly what it looks like. I kept my eyes on him. He gave a shrug, as if I'd asked about the weather. Did you want applause for finally noticing there it was? The tone that had always made me feel small. Not cruel, not overt, just dismissive enough to make me question my own instincts. He stirred his tea with a silver spoon, gently clinking the sides of the mug. You weren't meant to be part of the plan, but you insisted on staying loyal, on being useful and loyalty without leverage. He looked directly at me. Now is just servitude. I swallowed hard, but my feet didn't move. So you taught them, I taught them to understand the nature of power, and more importantly, the illusion of it. He sipped his tea. People will do anything to feel needed. That's where you came in. I took one step closer. You trained your children to use people. He smiled faintly. I trained them to win. I glanced around the room. The shelves were lined with neatly labeled binders, paperweights, a few trophies. The desk was pristine, except for one thing, his right hand resting on a drawer just barely. His fingers tapped twice and then paused. My eyes darted to the edge of the drawer. He caught the glance. There's nothing in there for you. I didn't wait. I stepped around the desk, yanked the drawer before he could react. A manila folder labeled in thick black marker. Amendments. Estate holdings. My pulse roared in my ears. I sat down in the guest chair without asking and flipped it open. Legal print, multiple pages, and then my name, or rather the place it used to be. I scanned down the line, Laura Vance removed from the family trust, dated 22 months ago, right after I sold my condo to cover Monroe's business debt. I had signed the check without hesitation. Monroe had cried. Told me I'd saved the business, the family, the future, and they'd use that moment, my generosity, to erase me. I turned the page. Further amendments, all pointing assets to Sybil and Monroe. Even the family home I was currently sitting in. The clause was simple contributions, not considered grounds for beneficiary rights. The trust didn't owe me a dime. I felt my throat constrict. All those years I thought I still had a small piece, just enough to fall back on if everything crumbled. It had been gone. 2 years. Gone. I looked up. Horace was watching me with something that almost resembled curiosity. We kept you around because it helped the image, he said casually. You were background warmth, a dependable figure. And let's be honest, someone to blame. When Sybil needed a redemption arc. I blinked. He continued as if lecturing. She's launching a new brand, lifestyle, women in rebuilding, from rock bottom to success. You're the rock bottom of Laura. You're the quiet sister who never got her turn, who got stepped on. They needed that contrast. You made her look resilient. I felt something inside me curl into something sharp. You weren't family, he said, voice low. Now you were a narrative. I stood up slowly, deliberately, folded the documents, and slid them into my purse. I hope you enjoyed the show, I said calmly, because mine hasn't started yet. I walked past the desk, past the portraits, past the silence outside. I pulled out my phone. Jasper answered on the second ring. "We're not going to the lawyer," I said, voice steady. There was a pause then, where I stared out across the front yard, the fading light stretching long shadows across the driveway to the press. I lowered the phone and slid it into my bag. Jasper was already behind the wheel of the old Chevy. I didn't say much as I climbed in. The sky had shifted into that late evening hue, deep blue, stretching wide over Eugene, with pink clouds trying to convince the world nothing was wrong. But everything was wrong. "You sure about this?" he asked, one hand on the gear shift, the other resting near mine. "Press means no turning back. I don't want back," I said, fastening my seatbelt. "I want out with fire." Jasper gave me a crooked smile, the kind that said he didn't fully approve but was going to back me anyway. "Then let's burn it down properly at my request." He drove us to the edge of downtown. The event was being held at the Holland Building, a towering glass-paneled venue. Sybil had posted about for weeks. Tonight was her big night, the launch of her new brand and podcast, Healing Through Family. Every local sponsor, influencer, and camera was there, while Jasper parked 2 blocks away. I changed in the back seat into a black sheath dress I kept folded in my tote. Nothing fancy but sharp. I pulled my hair back, swiped on lipstick, and as Jasper handed me a lapel mic and a flash drive, he smirked. "You look like trouble." "Good," I said, pushing open the car door. So do lies when they're cornered. The closer I got to the building, the louder the music thumped through the pavement. Spotlights beamed into the sky. Digital banners looped. Sybil's face, smiles, wind-blown arms crossed like some reformed mogul. From darkness to legacy. The captions read, "One woman's rise from family tragedy." Family tragedy. She was playing victim with my scars. I didn't wait at the door. I walked straight in. Jasper trailed behind with quiet purpose, brushing past the receptionist like we belonged, which oddly we did. The main room was flooded with people. Sybil stood at the front, microphone in hand, framed by floral backdrops and LED-lit signage. She was in the middle of a Q&A, speaking about authentic vulnerability and how hard times make strong women. Her voice was sugar-laced, barely trembling, just enough to seem relatable. I waited until a volunteer offered the mic to a guest. That's when I stepped forward and took it. The room froze. Every head turned. Even the cameraman paused. Sybil went pale. Her eyes locked on me like she'd seen a ghost she swore was buried. "Alora," she managed, her voice cracking. I didn't answer her. I turned toward the audience and toward the lens of the live stream camera that broadcasted to over 70,000 viewers across social media and pressed a small button on the mic. Jasper gave me the voice. Memo began to play. Hattie's voice, clear and steady, filled the room. "We had to cut Alora. She's too plain for our image." Monroe said she'd never draw clicks. Sybil said she looked like a schoolteacher, not a survivor. Gasps scattered through the hall. Sybil's jaw dropped. Her mouth moved, but no words came out. They rehearsed. The castle needs a maid line 5 times before letting Alora in the room. I was paid to play nurse. None of it was real. None of it. Phones were raised. Dancers' reps began whispering, fingers flying across screens. I saw a woman from Holbrook Media stand up and shake her head before exiting quietly. Then Horace appeared in the side aisle, still moving like he owned the world. He stormed toward the front, gesturing for the mic. Jasper was already there, blocking his path. He didn't need to touch him, just stood firm, solid as a wall. I turned to face Horace. My hands were steady. "You built this empire on lies," I said, not raising my voice. "And now it falls with truth." He stopped, mid-stride, hand twitching at his side behind me. Someone whispered, "Is this being recorded?" Another voice responded, "We're still live." Sybil looked like she might faint. I turned and walked away from the stage, past the blinking lights, the murmurs, the notepads. No one tried to stop me. The audience had turned from fans to witnesses. I'd stopped being invisible outside. The air felt too cold for fall. I leaned against the wall of the building, trying to breathe through the swirl inside me. The part of me that had expected triumph felt hollow, like all I'd done was confirm what I never wanted to believe. They never loved me. They used me. I murmured, staring at the sidewalk. And I let them. My knees buckled a little. Jasper reached out just in time, steadying me before I could fall completely. "Hey, no, you stood up. You told the truth. Don't let them take your center too." I closed my eyes, letting the silence settle over me. Then my phone vibrated in my purse. I pulled it out and tapped the screen. One message from Monroe. No text, just a photo. My home emptied, stripped, furniture gone, drawers open. My old framed photo smashed in the foreground. Beneath it, one line, "You wanted war. So here it is." I stared at it for a full 5 seconds, then turned to Jasper. "Take me home now." Jasper didn't ask questions as we pulled away from the downtown chaos. The echo of that voice memo still rang in my ears. Clear, damning, and final. But what waited for me now felt even heavier. I kept my eyes on the road ahead as the city thinned into quiet residential streets. He gripped the wheel tighter as we turned onto my block. The moment we pulled up to the curb, my breath caught. Everything I'd built was scattered across the grass, my couch, the antique lamp from my mother's estate, even the old welcome mat folded and tossed near a broken bookshelf. I got out of the car slowly, like stepping into a funeral I hadn't been invited to. My feet crunched across glass. The front door, white with a red wreath I'd hung last month, now had a gleaming new lock and a yellow sticker. "Do not tamper." Active order filed across the street. Mrs. Heaney, the neighbor, who always gave me tomatoes in summer, was watering her porch plants. She looked up startled. Then she whispered as I stepped onto my lawn. "They said you moved out without notice. They had a truck here early this morning." I blinked at her. "Who's they?" She hesitated. "Your sister and that man Monroe with boxes, papers, police?" I didn't wait. I walked straight to the front door and knocked, then pounded hard. "Nothing." I turned at it. "Hi." Blocked. "Of course." Jasper stood behind me tense, watching the street like it might erupt. "You want me to call someone? I am someone." I said, my voice flat. The sirens arrived before I could try the back. 2 cruisers' blue lights washing over my driveway like shame. Out stepped Monroe in a pressed blazer, and Sybil in head-to-toe beige like she was headed to brunch, not betrayal. 2 officers followed them. One carried a clipboard. "Miss Moran," one said carefully, "we've received notice this property is currently under emergency guardianship." I stared at him. "Excuse me." Sybil stepped forward calm like she practiced in a mirror. "Allura, this isn't how we wanted it. But you left us no choice." I didn't speak. I just looked at the officer guardianship. I repeated slowly. Monroe sighed like a man too exhausted by the truth. "After your recent public outbursts, we had concerns. The court granted temporary control to Sybil." Of what I snapped my mind, my house. Sybil pulled out a manila envelope. "Your well-being." The officer handed me the papers. Thick, notarized, stamped. The words blurred for a second, but I caught the key phrases. "Emergency guardianship. Temporary transfer of authority. Verified by Dr. Lyle Fisher." I laughed out loud. Lyle was Sybil's college boyfriend. Last I heard, he ran a wellness blog from Santa Fe and sold herbal kits on Etsy. Jasper stepped forward and took the papers from me. His eyes scanned the first page. "They filed these 3 weeks ago," he murmured. "On the same day Sybil hosted that healing dinner." I dropped to the curb. Not because I was overwhelmed, not yet, but because my niece needed a second to remember where strength lived. "They're trying to erase me," I said quietly. Paper by paper, Sybil crouched beside me. Her voice dropped to a hiss. "You made this ugly Allura. All you had to do was stay in your place, but now live with it." She stood and walked back toward the driveway. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just said okay. Jasper helped me to my feet, his hand gripping my elbow just tightly enough to remind me I wasn't entirely alone. Back in the car, I didn't speak for 2 blocks. Then I turned to him. "Can you take me to my old office?" He glanced at me. "The one above the clinic." I nodded. "The one they forgot." I kept the lease on. It was dark by the time we reached the narrow red brick building on Maple. The second floor smelled like dust and lemon cleaner, just as I remembered. The light flickered above the door, but the lock still recognized my key. Inside, the furniture was minimal. Just a desk, a chair, a small safe tucked behind a cabinet. I knelt, entered the combination, and opened the door. Inside, a folder, blue thick, marked with bold red ink, "For when they go too far." Jasper sat down across from me as I placed the folder on the desk and flipped it open. birth certificates, legal deeds from my mother's estate, audio backups of conversations with Monroe, a scan of the real power of attorney. I never signed away. They think I didn't prepare. I whispered they think I was soft, distracted, too plain for their stage. Jasper leaned forward, watching me with something close to. Are they think wrong? I gathered the documents one by one. My hands steady now. The locks may have spoken, but they weren't the final word. Jasper didn't speak as we pulled away from my old office. I could feel his eyes on me, waiting for me to breathe, maybe to break, but I stayed focused. Flipping through the papers I'd kept for years, half out of fear, half out of some instinct, that one day I'd need them. Today was that day. We drove straight to Amina's apartment. Her building sat at the edge of downtown Eugene, tucked between a quiet bakery and a forgotten bookstore. She greeted us in a hoodie and leggings, her curly hair tied high like she'd just come off a shift hacking the Pentagon. She hugged me tight. "You sure about this?" she asked, leading us inside. "I'm not interested in revenge," I said, stepping into her workspace. "Just truth." Amina grinned, motioning toward a cluttered desk. "Then you've come to the right woman." I pulled the pen-shaped recorder from my bag and placed it on the table. I left this in the hallway vent the night Monroe told the family I was deteriorating. I knew something was off. She turned it over, nodded. Micro-directional pickup if it caught audio. "Even faint, we can boost it." Jasper paced behind us, his arms folded. I sat quietly while Amina connected the device to her laptop, fingers tapping like music across her keyboard. After a few minutes, the room filled with faint static, then voices clearer with each second. "If she ever figures this out," Monroe's voice said, "smooth and smug, will be long gone. The papers are airtight." Lyle signed off. A chuckle. "Sybils. She's too soft, too loyal. She won't fight then." Monroe again. "Lower now. And when this guardianship kicks in, we own her, on paper and perception." Amina stopped the playback. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. "That's what we needed," I said. 2 hours later, I walked into the community hall, nerve-steeled face calm. The HOA meeting was already in full swing. Sybil stood near the front, chatting with the president like old friends, while Monroe leaned against the wall, arms crossed, sipping bottled water like it was champagne. Their eyes slid past me at first, then landed. Sybil's smile twitched. Monroe straightened. I walked past them without a word. Miss. The president greeted politely. "You're late. I'm right on time," I said, placing my tablet on the table beside the coffee carafe. "I have something I'd like the board to hear." Monroe stepped forward, chuckling, like he'd been waiting for this. "We're not here for games, Allura. If you want to file a complaint, there's a process." I pressed play. His voice filled the room. The smugness, the condescension, the mockery of my stupid loyalty. Sybil's laugh, her sneering dismissal. And finally, Monroe whispering, as pen met paper. "She won't even know what hit her." Silence. It was thick, charged, tangible. One woman near the back gasped. Another board member leaned forward, blinking. "Is that real?" Someone muttered a voice from the left. "That's his voice, no question." The president looked stunned. "Miss Maron, if this is authentic, there are legal and ethical violations beyond just our bylaws." Monroe tried to speak. Jasper stepped forward, blocking him. "Let her finish," he said. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. I turned to the board. They weaponized perception, used my name, my silence, my home. But I'm done being quiet. Gasps turned to murmurs. Phones came out. Live streams clicked on. The clips spread like fire in dry grass. Then the whispering started, not toward me, but about them. "She's not the crazy one. They lied. They forged papers. I trusted them with my daughter's scholarship fund." The president cleared his throat. "Effective immediately, Monroe and Sybil's community privileges are suspended pending investigation." Monroe tried again. "You people don't understand." "No, Monroe," I interrupted. "They finally do." The meeting ended with a sharpness I hadn't expected. No applause, no dramatic exit, just tension, cold, final, outside. I sat on the bench under the big elm tree and looked up at the gray sky. I thought I'd feel triumphant, victorious, but all I felt was hollow. They never loved me. I whispered, barely audible. They used me, and I let them. My hands trembled finally, not with rage, but release. I nearly folded in on myself, but Jasper was there, always. His hand gripped mine like an anchor. "You didn't let them," he said softly. "You trusted them." "That's different." The silence that followed was heavy, but healing. Then my phone buzzed. A photo. My house empty. The caption, "You wanted war." So here it is. I stood slowly cold, sinking deep into my bones. "Take me home," I told Jasper. Now the silence in the car didn't feel awkward. It felt sacred. Jasper kept his eyes on the road, letting me hold space with my thoughts. My phone sat face down in my lap. That photo of my ransacked house still lingered in the corners of my mind. But something heavier was pulling now. Something final. We pulled into the parking lot of Halverson and Grant Law Group just after 10 a.m. The sky was still overcast, a common Oregon gray, but it felt like the air had changed. Heavier loaded inside. The air smelled of wood polish and paperwork. Miss Halverson Sharp, in a navy suit and silver glasses, gestured toward the conference room. Her expression was neutral, but her eyes scanned me carefully, like she already knew everything I'd been through. We sat across from her at the long oak table. She placed a sealed envelope in front of me and a small voice recorder beside it. "Your father-in-law," she said. Her voice even gave me explicit instructions to hand this over. "If your name was ever removed from any legal document without your consent, I believe that time is now." My hand hovered over the envelope. The seal had my name on it, handwritten in the neat, disciplined scrawl I remembered from Horace's notes around the house. I broke the seal. Inside was a letter. No more than 2 paragraphs and a USB stick. "I'm not asking for forgiveness." The letter began, "I'm asking for acknowledgement that in the end, I chose you." I plugged the USB into the laptop Miss Halverson provided. Horace's voice filled the room slower than I remembered, but unmistakably him. "They think I didn't know," he said. That age dulled me, that I was just the old man in the chair. But I saw everything. The manipulation, the guardianship stunt, Sybil's fake tears, Monroe's smirk after she left the room. He paused, then added, "But Laura, you stayed, even when I was cruel, even when I pretended not to see you." I pressed pause. My breath caught. I wasn't crying, not exactly, but something inside cracked wide open. Not from grief, but from the weight of finally being seen. Miss Halverson let the silence settle before speaking again. Now she said, sliding a fresh folder across the table, "Here's the legal matter you really need to hear." She opened the folder for me. I leaned in. "This," she said, tapping a document, "is a notarized amendment to Horace Marine's estate plan executed 3 months before his death." Her finger traced the page. Clause 14. "For any individual proven to have manipulated medical or legal documents to seize control of another's estate shall forfeit all inheritance." I blinked. "You mean?" "Yes. Monroe and Sybil have voided their rights permanently. Effective immediately." Jasper leaned in, barely hiding his smirk. "So who inherits?" Miss Halverson turned the next page. "You do." It didn't hit all at once. It came like a slow, steady wave. The Marin estate, real estate holdings, stock portfolios, the main property in Bend, the vineyard shares, even the cash assets, all defaulted to me. "All filed," she added. "And before you ask, yes, they were notified this morning." As if on cue, the door burst open. Monroe stormed in first, red-faced Sybil just behind him, breathless and pale. "You absolute witch!" Monroe bellowed. "You manipulated a dying man." I stood. "No," I said calmly. "You taught me how to play the game, and I got better at it." Sybil stepped forward, palms flat on the table. "This was our family legacy," he promised. He promised to give it to someone who wouldn't ruin it. I cut in. "He chose me. And you should thank him. Because if I'd wanted to destroy everything, I would have done it publicly." Miss Halverson cleared her throat and slid a copy of the amendment toward them. "It's all here. You are no longer entitled to any portion of the estate. You may seek private counsel if you wish, but the motion is final." Monroe grabbed the packet like he might rip it apart. He was confused. He was weak. "Maybe," I said, but he was still sharper than both of you combined. They didn't argue. Not really. They just stood there, Sybil's face frozen in disbelief. Monroe's hands shaking ever so slightly as he flipped through pages he could barely comprehend. Jasper didn't say a word. He didn't have to. As they turned to leave, I watched them both. No fire left, just smoke. And for once, I didn't feel like I needed to shout to be heard. They heard me now. As the door clicked shut behind them, I turned to Jasper and said quietly, "I need one last thing." Jasper didn't ask questions when I told him I needed one last thing. He just drove. We pulled up to the estate just after 3 p.m. The sun had finally pierced the Oregon clouds, casting light across the Marin house like it was something holy. But to me, it was just a structure. Brick glass, old stories, some worth remembering. Most not. I walked through the tall doors alone. Jasper waited in the car. The house was quieter than I remembered, maybe because it wasn't pretending anymore. No staged smiles, no symbols, rehearsed sympathy, no Monroe lurking behind corners. Just me. I stepped into the main hallway, the place where this entire masquerade had begun. And there it was, empty mantle still collecting dust. I reached into my coat and pulled out the photo I had retrieved from storage weeks earlier. The one of Horace in uniform, stern but proud. The photo Sybil had once scoffed at, tossed aside like it meant nothing. I set it back in its place, slowly, deliberately. "He saw me," I whispered. That picture wasn't just paper. It was an echo, a tether, a reminder that despite everything someone may be, the last person I expected had recognized my worth, and that mattered. I took my time, walking room to room. No vengeance, no fire, just peace, the guest house. I'd already arranged for it to be donated to a veteran recovery foundation. Horace would have respected that. He had his demons, but he knew the cost of silence. The stocks tied to Monroe's fake companies liquidated, the proceeds redirected to a scholarship fund for family caregivers. People who, like me, had spent years cleaning up messes no one clapped for. I passed the media requests to Jasper, told him to decline them all. Not even one he asked. Some victories, I said, are meant to be quiet. The last room was Monroe's study. I hadn't stepped in here since the morning I found the falsified guardianship documents. It still smelled like his cologne and deception. I moved toward the desk's second drawer, right side. I'd avoided it on purpose. Something about it felt unfinished. Heavy. I opened it. Inside was a single envelope. No name, but the handwriting was Horace's. I would have recognized that steady script anywhere. The letter wasn't long. "You reminded me of who I was before the money, before the power. I hated that about you. You made me see myself. But you're the only one who didn't give up on this family. That makes you more Marian than any of them." I read it twice, not to understand it, just to feel it. Tears came not from pain, from release. Some doors don't need to slam shut to be closed. By dusk, I was packing one suitcase, just the essentials. The housekeeper I hired would handle the rest. Jasper was already waiting in the driveway, leaning against the car like he'd known this day would come. "Where to your majesty?" he asked, half grinning. I smiled, not like the past. Not a mask, a real one. "Somewhere I'm not the help," I said, pulling the gate remote from my pocket. As we drove off, the estate disappeared behind the trees. No goodbye, no backward glance. Later that week, Sybil tried to file suit. It lasted 3 hours in court. Between the will, Horace's voice recording, and every shred of evidence we'd collected, it evaporated. Monroe filed for bankruptcy a month later. No one wanted to do business with a man who'd staged a disability and weaponized legal guardianship. They lost everything, and I left with peace. Not furniture, not headlines. Peace! Because sometimes that's all you ever really need. I remembered what Sybil said once, mocking me while I cleaned up the kitchen after one of their parties. "Every castle needs a maid." She was wrong. Every castle needs a queen. They called me the maid of their castle. But it turns out I was the only one who ever kept it standing.